All right, we covered a ton about different communications and media types and how it communicates. Let's get into now the physical side of this. What does this look like in reality? So let's take a look at cable management. All right, within this video, what we're going to be talking about is networking equipment and how you get the devices to actually connect to this different networking equipment. We're going to take a look at a network room and what a network room might look like. And then we'll also talk about what some of the differences are when you're talking about a large company. So we're going to start out talking about a small company, and then we'll look at more of a large company and how it differs a bit. All right, so the scenario is that I've been hired to go into this small workspace and design, and I need to create a design to cable this up. So that's the scenario that I'm going to run. So first of all, I'm going to take a look at it, and I'm going to assume that I'm going to want an access point to each one of these locations. So somehow I need to get from the switch to those access points. I also see workstations here. I see several workstations here. And I see some places that possibly is going to be a workstation. It doesn't have a computer at it, but I'm going to think that that's probably, I'm going to need something in there as well. I see that there's a little kitchenette here, a place where employees might go and prepare meals and stuff, and probably don't need that in there, but we're seeing more and more Internet of Things devices out there that need some sort of network connectivity. A lot of them connect wirelessly. I'm just going to put a few cable drops in there. When I say drops, that means that I'm going to actually put a jack in there that people can connect into. So I'm going to put a few in there. And for each one of these desks, I'm actually going to do more than one cable drop for those desks. So there's going to be more than one jack available for each of those desks. And so I might have the phone, a connectivity to the phone. I might have the computer. They might have a NAS. They might have a printer. There might be multiple reasons why they have lots of devices that they need to connect. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 drops for every one of these stations. That's 3 jacks for every one of these stations that I have. Now, another thing I'm going to need to provide this office is an internet connection. So I'm going to call up an internet service provider and order an internet connection, and they're going to tell me exactly where it is that their equipment is going to be at and where I can connect into their equipment. And that's called a point of demarcation or demarcation point. So they probably already have a room set aside for specifically that. So maybe it's in this room right here, and there's going to be a jack, or there's going to be a coax termination point, or something in there that is going to be the point of demarcation. The point of demarcation, anything before that is the responsibility for the internet service provider. Anything after that is my responsibility. So I've got the demarcation point. I'm going to make this room right here my network room. So that's my network room or network closet. A lot of times it's called a closet because in some older buildings, networking was an afterthought. And so a lot of times the network got stuck in a closet. And I've certainly had cases where I was stuck in a closet configuring equipment and stuff because it just was not thought of in some of these older buildings. All right, so somehow I'm going to put in here, I'm going to put maybe a modem, maybe a router, a firewall, a switch. I'm going to put some equipment in there. So I'm going to need a rack. So I'm going to put a rack inside there that I'm going to put my equipment on there. And I got a picture of a rack that I'm going to show you in a bit. But so I've got this rack that's right here. And then I need to somehow get from this switch, I need to get to my workstations, and I need to put the drops into these workstations. So I'm going to create a cable run, and it's going to go from this rack, going to go out, and I'm going to have 3 cables that are going to drop at this workstation right here. And then I'm going to have another 3 cables that are going to come to this workstation right here. And another 3 cables are going to come to this workstation right here, and another 3 cables to this workstation right here. So now I've already, just for one room that has 4 desks, I've already ran 12 cables here. Quite a bit. Now remember, it's better for me to run a cable now and rather than later on, if I have to call somebody back because I underscoped this or I didn't run enough cables to these devices, and I have to call somebody back, a low voltage contractor, to actually install another line. It's going to be quite a bit more costly. So I'd rather just get extra lines out there now than worry about it later on. So then I'm going to run 3 cables to this drop right here, another 3 cables to this drop. I'm going to run a cable to each one of my access points that are out here, another 3 cables to this drop right here, maybe 3 cables to my kitchenette there. So you get the point that I'm going to run all my cables from this single location, and I'm going to what's called home run this all out to these different devices, and they're all going to come into this rack right here. On the end here, what I'll probably do is I'll have jacks that are in the wall, and there's these little jacks that you punch down and you put them in, plug them into the wall. So I'll put those all into the wall, so that way these devices can connect. So the jack might be right here, the plate that where the jack is at might be right here, and then they're going to need to have a cable that goes up to their desk. And so they have a cable that runs up to their desk. So one thing I do have to keep in mind, and I'll mention this later as well, is that I only have 100 meters to work with. And because I have a cable that runs from this jack to that laptop right there, maybe that's 10 meters in itself, or maybe it's probably not 10 meters, but possibly I've ran 30-foot cables from a jack to a machine before. Or maybe the other thing too is I'm going to actually have a little patch cable in this room as well. So I got to be conscious of that. And so the general rule is that you probably don't want from your network closet to all of your devices, you don't want to run a cable that's longer than 90 meters. 100 meters is the max for Ethernet. So if I ran 90 meters, that gives me 10 meters for a patch cable on this side to connect to the device and a patch cable on this side to connect into the switch. And we're going to see a visual about those a little bit later on. But just know that I probably want to limit these cable runs to 90 meters. All right, and then on this side of it, I have jacks on this side. I'm actually going to put a jack over here on this side, and I'll show you a network closet, and I'm going to show you why that is. But now I've got connectivity within the office, and I'm ready to connect it into my, my devices. So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so this is a traditional, typical network room or network closet. This is, I think probably is a network closet. This is an old building, so probably was a closet at one point in time. We outfitted it, made it into a network room. And so this is one of the networks that I worked on in the past. And off here in the background, we see the demarcation point. So the phone company provides a line up to a certain point, and this happens to provide this was Ethernet over fiber. So then they had equipment that converted it to copper. So this is a copper connection right here, and I've got an Ethernet cable plugged into it. And then I've got my rack right here that's setting up, and racks are measured in U's or units. And so this is probably, my guess would be like a 44U rack. So it has 44 units in it. And then you buy equipment and it takes up a certain amount of U's. So like my switches right here take up 1 U on this rack. So I can actually have 44 of those different switches on this rack. All right, so what else do we see here? Up at the top is my patch panel. So I talked about those network runs that come from the rack and go to each one of those drops that I have out on my network. And so this is showing the patch panel of where all those network connections come back in and they get punched down. And the reason why there's a tool that actually punches it and pushes the cable, pushes the little conductors into these little slots and on the back. And so later on I'll have a video about that. But they connect onto the back here, and then on the front, I can plug in using an RJ45. And so I buy patch cables. I don't make patch cables. I've seen a lot of lousy patch cables, and it takes up a lot of time. So for a lot of businesses, I'd say it's better just to buy patch cables. But there are patch cables that are running from each one of these drops down this cable run right here, and then up into these switches. And so I've got a lot of these that are running down here. You can see there's a big mass of connections. And in here are a bunch of access switches. So I've got the switches that are the devices are plugging into. So those are access switches right there. And then they're being covered up by some some patch cable management. So they run through these little troughs. This is a little trough right here as well. So they run through these troughs to clean it up. So what I'll do is there's little locks on here, and I will unlock that and then run the cable down. And these will pop down, and I'll run cables through here, down here, up here, through these cable runs and up to the switch to have it all connected in. And so those are the cable runs. And I don't necessarily want every single jack live out there. So once again, those desks had 3 drops for every desk. And so if I had each one of those live, I would have to have more switches. So maybe I don't want to make every single one of those live. So at different times, I'll come in here and clean this up and clear up a bunch of ports on the switches, and then run only the ones that I need to make the ports live that need to be live in this case right here. All right, so I have the access switches. Those are what is connecting all of the different devices out on this network, and they are connecting then to the network. It gives them connectivity. And then down here towards the bottom, this is a spare switch right here. And then this switch right here and this switch right here are my core switches. So you can't see one of them, but those are my core switches. So those have everything comes from those access switches and from other switches in the building. So this is a big enough location where there's other closets, there's other network closets throughout this building. And so they come back here as well. And so they all connect into these core switches. Now, no fiber in these runs, but a lot of times you'll see that fiber runs from these main core switches out to your access switches. So a lot of times you'll see fiber runs that go between these. And then if you look further down on here, there's a little device that sits on here. It's quite a bit smaller, and that's the wireless LAN controller. So that controls all of the access points. And then down below that is the firewalls. So those are the firewalls. There's 2 of them. They're in redundancy. They're plugged into these switches. So there's redundancy within there. And then down below that, we have the UPSs, uninterruptible power supply. So these UPSs supply power. So if there is ever a power outage, then we'd still be up and running. And that's important because we have voice over IP phones, and we need those phones up and running even in an emergency. So how this would look like if you were to trace this from our devices out on the network would be connected from that device down into the jack. The jack would then run to this patch panel, and maybe this jack right here. And then from there, we have a patch cable that runs down and into the access switches. And the access switches have lines that come down, more than one, that come down into both of these cores. And so we've got 2 core switches for redundancy. From there, things are guarded. They come down and are guarded by these 2 firewalls. And these firewalls then go out. They actually run up and around and come back down and plug into the point of demarcation. So they come up and around and plug into the point of demarcation. So that's how those are connected. And so that is what a network closet looks like. I am going to point out one other thing here too. Well, I've got some 110 blocks here in the back. 110 blocks are old phone system connectors. You can see that those are all taken out. I cleaned all of these up, but the phone company, they would come in, and that would be the point of demarcation for those phone lines. And then you would create little jumpers that would go then and connect your different phones. Thank goodness a lot of these networks, you don't have to do that anymore. Some bigger businesses would have to have just a person dedicated to phones, and now it's all voice over IP. You just plug the phone in and it works. Or now what I've switched my company now over to is it's just all soft phones. So they're all on your computer, and you just use your computer. So we've come a long ways, but this is a network closet here, and how it connects from these different devices from your switch out to your laptops and your desktops and your wireless access points and all of the other things that you're networking. So if you're working in a big office building and you have lots of connections, then it might not be reasonable to come back to just a single network closet. In that case, you might have multiple network closets. So I just want to describe what that might look like. And in this case, we said that there's a rack in here and we have switches on that rack. And if we are going to some of these connections and they're over 90 meters, then we run into that issue where we're going to possibly go over the 100-meter limit with Ethernet, and we're going to maybe get some strange network connectivity issues. So we want to avoid doing that. So let's say we have another closet. Let's say there's another closet over here, and we need to connect some of these devices to that. So we're going to have a rack in there with some switches on it. And then between these two devices, we're going to either run some fiber lines or some Ethernet cables between these two devices. We need to maybe run multiple. If they're Ethernet, maybe it's going to be, we're going to make a port channel and run multiple lines and group them all together so it acts as one. So we get a 4 gig connection instead of a 1 gig connection, or maybe our switches are capable of handling a 10 gig connection. So we want to run some sort of connections between these. And if it's long enough, these connections may need to be fiber. And then for all the close ones to this network room, then we'd run cables out to the different drops that we have. And for the ones that are closer to this one, then we run connections out. And we would have a patch panel and a switch in there that would service all the ones that are closer to there. And then we would have a patch panel and switches that would service all the ones that are closer to that. So that's what you would do with a bigger office. Now there's names for these. So we call this a main distribution frame, or a MDF. So these closets are often called MDFs. And I think that actually stems more from the phone industry, where we call this the MDF, but I've seen data closets called the same thing. And then this would be a IDF, or a intermediate distribution frame. So IDF and MDF. MDF is the main, IDF is the intermediary, or it's kind of a stepping stone. So that is, and you will see this possibly on the same floor. I've had big buildings where I've had a MDF on one side and it goes out to IDFs on the other side and IDFs on each of the floors. So you may see many different IDFs inside of a building, quite possibly if you're working in a large office building. All right, one more thing I'll add to this is that I showed you the after pictures after I did a cleanup of the network closet, but quite often you get network closets that look much different. So this is a before and after picture. This is what network closets, a lot of my network closets, when I step into a business, I see, and it is scary. And so I say that is not reasonable for me to manage that. Let's clean it up, and then I will clean it up. And so this was a weekend's worth of work of cleaning this up and getting it all straightened up, but feels so much better about what this looks like versus what this crazy mess looks like. All right, there you have it. This is how you manage the cables. We talked about the networking equipment and how we have switches and patch panels, and how we bring that, then we create these runs that go out to the different jacks throughout the office. So you do that by having a network room or multiple network rooms, and we even took a look at some of the components that you see within the network room and some of the cable management that happens within those network rooms. And then with large companies, you'll see that you'll have to have MDFs and IDFs. That is a main network room that has a lot of your equipment and your distribution equipment in there. And then you have a bunch of access closets where you have more access equipment to connect the end devices to the network. So that would be for a bigger company. Thanks again for watching my video. If you liked it, could you hit that like